Hello, you are now entering the infinite void. Hang on tight. We cannot save you now.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your co-host Jacob.
And I'm your co-host Matty, and this week's topic is automation. So, I guess this sort of carries on from where we left off last week. So, last week's episode, we were looking at sort of cities of the future, and we were discussing sort of like building sort of cities 100 years from now, what we can expect. And we sort of tried to tiptoe around the sort of concept of automation, but you can't really discuss the future without considering it. So, I think it's good to come back to it. It's sort of a topic that I wanted to do sort of personally anyway. So hopefully this episode will sort of pick up from where we left off and sort of look at automation and where it's going and what technologies there are now. So yeah, hopefully that'd be good, I think.
Yeah, no, totally. I'd agree with you. It's quite funny because, like, as you said last week, we were kind of like dancing around the idea of cities in the future, but there is so much automation going into that it's kind of like it was quite hard to just kind of talk about like the basics of it. So yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I think sort of as we go through this episode, we'll see that sort of automation is going to become not a new thing, but something that's sort of like just baked into the fabric of what we use every day.
Yes.
Sort of technologies that now aren't automated will just be completely replaced. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. And I guess the sort of first place to start is looking at sort of what areas are going to be affected most by automation.
Yeah.
And I guess we're looking at sort of short, medium time scale. So sort of the next sort of 10 to 50 years, I guess. So sort of what most interests you in this and where do you think it's going?
So transport has to be one of the top ones, and then I would say retail.
Yeah.
Like I'd probably say like probably the biggest two, but again, just off the top of my head, thinking of other ones that I'm looking off this list, you've got loads, you've got agriculture, you've got everything. So I don't really know, but I'd say for like the ones that people will notice the most, I think it'll be retail and transport. I think our lives will drastically change in that approach, and then more so like behind the scenes with like energy and agriculture and stuff like that. It'll be happening on a much bigger level, but I don't think we'll see it as much.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good point. Is that agriculture is one of the ones that I want to discuss as well, and it will probably be one of the quicker ones to develop. But probably most people won't notice as much because it doesn't employ sort of that area of it. It doesn't employ huge amounts of people, and yeah, it's sort of behind the scenes, isn't it? But yeah, I think the transportation one's the one that I wanted to discuss first because I think that's a really interesting one. And I guess sort of cars are obviously making sort of big news now. We're starting to see sort of rollouts of driverless and automated cars. So, at the most, I mean, it's not basic, it's quite difficult, but sort of things like the Tesla where it has the sort of lane following and the ability to detect obstacles and stuff. That is sort of almost like a stepping stone, I guess, to full automation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I think, and it's interesting as well because it's kind of like I don't know when you last watched this because it's quite an old film, but even like the film I, Robot, that idea that once all transport is automated, it'll kind of like be safer, and then anybody that's driving that isn't automated will be like the risk factor in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like this idea of once everything, particularly cars, is automated, it becomes like A, safer, and B, more efficient. You don't get the sort of traffic jams that occur, when you're sat on the motorway and it's sort of just like everything bunches up and then just sort of rolls out the other side.
Yeah.
And there's no like real cause for the traffic jam. It just sort of happens because people brake and then they brake behind them. That doesn't happen with automated vehicles because they can all move at the same time because they react effectively instantly to sort of things happening in front of them.
Yeah, it's like a giant hive mind almost.
Yeah, you know what it's like. You're sat like in a row of traffic, like 20 cars deep at a traffic light, and the front car goes, and like you sit there and you don't move, and by the time you move, it's already gone to red. that just won't happen with automated vehicles because, you know, full automation would be they all just sort of roll at the same time, reacting to the light at the same time. So,
Could there even be an argument that if automation was like that good, that there would be no need for traffic lights because everything would just be able to go through all the junctions and lanes aware of each other?
yeah, cars are just weaving through each other,
Yeah,
like
they're
just sort of slowing down slightly so they miss each other. Just, I guess so. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that, but you know, I'm sure it's technically capable. It's just, I think the other sort of thing is like how willing people are sort of going to accept that. And I think, you know, I said about the cars developing, sort of one of the first things that we're starting to see is the idea of like driverless taxis and stuff. You know, it really sort of cuts out the middleman, that you can just sort of hail a car and it will just automated arrive where you need to be.
Yes.
And, you know, I think there's quite a lot of sort of opposition to that, just as sort of it's not moral or ethics, but it just sort of doesn't feel right getting into a car that doesn't have any sort of controls or any sort of driver.
Yeah.
You know, and even if it is on paper safer, I think there's sort of an issue here of like trying to convince people that this sort of needs to happen or should happen, kind of thing. So,
but isn't like for a good example, isn't like most flying, for instance, is like automated now, isn't it? And then like the pilots are kind of just there for an emergency, and we've seemed to have got used to that, especially with like even like with space. Like it's mostly automated. It's very obviously when they're like docking and stuff, they do kind of like step in, but even then, some of it's automated.
Yeah.
But it's just this idea, because I think humans kind of treat their cars like their number one kind of like possession almost. It's kind of like we're back in the day, and it's like we're cowboys and it's our horse kind of thing on how we're going to get around.
Yeah. I think that's sort of it. Like people like owning and sort of driving cars, don't they? But I think there is sort of a quite big step between, you know, you said about the pilots, sort of most of it is automated. They just sort of sit there for 90% of the flights.
Exactly.
I think there would be a drastic shift in people's opinions if airlines started saying, oh, we've managed to get that last 10% working. You know, planes can now sort of almost flawlessly land and take off themselves. We're not going to have a pilot on the plane. I think that's sort of a real like shift. You know, the difference between sort of a Tesla arriving and it's driving itself, but the sort of taxi driver is sat there, to a Tesla arriving and there isn't a driver in it, I think is is sort of quite a big change, sort of. Sort of like a personal sort of perspective, but
no, I'd agree with you. I think it's kind of like one of those things, isn't it? But then, like everything, of like a generation that's born into that'll just be normal to them.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. And I think ultimately it will come down to cost. You know, in the short term, 5-10 years, you know, we probably will see, you know, taxi companies with these cars that have drivers in them, sort of almost pointlessly. And once sort of planes develop to that point, you know, there will still be pilots not really doing anything. You know, once you sort of get to the perception that most people are comfortable without there being a driver, it will just be economics take over and they just axe them because there's no need for them to be there and they could save quite a lot of money. So I think the other sort of area that I wanted to discuss with transportation and sort of road vehicles is trucking.
Yes,
I think that will be, I'd pull it as my number one short-term impact that it's going to have. You know, trucking is, unlike taxis where they're sort of driving around city centres and avoiding obstacles and stuff, most trucking is driving in an almost straight line on wide, well-defined highways with clear signs and stuff.
Yeah.
And particularly sort of places like Australia and America, you know, you can easily see how I think companies like Amazon and stuff, they could just sort of get these automated trucks to drive across the country between their distribution centres on the edge of town.
Yeah.
And that is like the almost ideal use case for the sort of vehicles to do their thing. You know, the technology is already here. You know, a Tesla car can do exactly this, drive on a well-defined highway almost flawlessly.
Yeah.
You know, it's that's what it's for. And you start putting that into trucks, which Tesla are starting to do, with their sort of new Cybertruck and their semis. That's definitely a game changer because A, it makes sense. B, it's obvious to people, and it sort of puts automation into a place where people see it working every day.
Yeah.
And C, sort of something that I want to come back to later is this is a lot of people being affected by it in terms of jobs. There's a lot of people trucking in America, in particular. So
Yeah.
I think trucking is probably the number one thing that we will see in the short term. Personally.
Yeah. No, totally. And it's not just like the trucking either, because like it's all of the little like gas stations and little towns and stuff that rely on those routes as well, because there won't be anybody like staying there or shopping there. So yeah, no, totally. I'd definitely say that it's like transport and retail will be like the big ones that everybody will see for sure.
Yeah, I think the retail one, if we sort of move on to that, I think that's almost more like a slow burner. I think with the transportation, one day, there will be a law passed that says trucks or cars can drive automated, following these rules, sorts of thing.
Yeah.
And then almost overnight, you will see trucking companies and taxi firms just buying up thousands of these vehicles because it makes complete sense to do it.
Yeah.
But the retail one is sort of already happening, isn't it? And it's sort of happening in the background and just sort of slipping by. And I would be surprised if it makes the sort of same headlines that vehicles do, because, again, Amazon, like a lot of their distribution centers are already automated with like robots that go around and collect like the stuff off the shelves and put it in the sort of distribution areas.
Yeah.
And obviously self-service checkout and these sorts of things. It's a lot of retail is already automated.
I think where people it'll start like causing a bit of a scene. Mm-hmm. I think will be more so in like the front facing retail aspects of it. So like in the shop, because like you're already seeing it now with like your average supermarket, you've got like self checkout and stuff like that. But you've even got like those new Amazon like grocery stores that, have you seen them when you like put something in the trolley? Yeah. It like scans it and it like adds it to your bill kind of thing. Or you can do like smart shopping at like Sainsbury's and stuff like that.
That was the one they launched. I think it was in Seattle a couple of years ago they launched it, didn't it?
Yeah.
And there were sort of like hundreds of cameras on the roof and like all the items were tagged. So like you didn't have to like scan it at all. It was just the moment you took it off the shelf and put it in your basket, it knew that you were taking it. So and then you just walked out with it. So yeah, I think that's almost like a prototype, like end game, isn't it? But the short scale is going to be sort of more self-service and
and I think as well, even like when it comes to like events, I can, especially with like COVID, do you know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine us, without sounding like the guy that's like, oh, but like, I can't imagine us ever going back to completely how it was.
No.
I think there will always be a newer system, and I don't know how they're going to get around it for like nightclubs and festivals and all that kind of stuff. Just even looking back and thinking about it, it's mad that like it's just totally different world. Do you know what I mean? Like you go to your Reading Festival and you don't shower for like 5 days and you're just in a crowd full of people shouting, no one's washing, like it's just crazy. And even kind of like clubbing, everybody's just drunk and shouting and just like touching each other. And I just don't know. I don't know what the future holds for that. I think obviously it will come back. They're not just going to get rid of it forever, but you can even see that becoming automated. So that kind of like dystopian idea that you have to walk through like a temperature scanner before you can go in and things like that. And I think those kinds of things, I think are going to be much more likely now. I think that we will probably even see them quicker. So say if that was like something that was going to be on the 10-year plan, I think because of what's happened, I could totally see that being a thing. Do you know what I mean? By the time we go back to like, maybe not like the small bars and stuff, but like the big clubs and stuff
Yeah.
at the universities and the ones that have got the massive capacities, I could totally see that being a thing, because you've already kind of got it with how they scan your ID. Like, I don't know what it's like in America, but like for me at uni in the UK, you had to like give them your ID to like scan it, and then you had to go and stand in front of this thing and it'd take a photo of you.
Yeah. No, I think COVID will definitely be a sort of catalyst for this sort of stuff. Again and again with like the retail and transportation. I don't, driverless taxis solve a problem. Sort of automated shopping where you don't interact with anyone solves the problem. These sorts of things I think will get sort of like fast tracked through to sort of solve COVID issues. I think that's totally sort of correct, and I'd put money on the table that will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I honestly, whoever's got to sort that out, good luck to you, because that is going to be an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so I got a few little things here just to kind of give a bit of a premise. So I didn't actually know that there are 3 different types of automation when it comes to like production and stuff either.
Mm-hmm.
So this surprised me, because I was looking into all sorts of automation, and it's not just like machine learning. And the 3 were fixed automation, programmable automation, and flexible automation.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. I thought it was kind of all just under one banner, but it makes sense. The flexible automation is kind of one of the cooler ones that I was looking into, like this idea that like it's built for a purpose, but it can do other things too if it needs to.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of interesting.
It's like, yeah. So I guess this is sort of, so fixed would be sort of on an assembly line, the robot that puts the bolts into one bit of a car. It is built entirely to do that thing, and it does it completely like autonomously and doesn't need any help to do it. But it does one single nut on a car, or like sprays one panel of a car. So that's like, and that's existed for like years, hasn't it? But
Yeah.
I think you're right that the sort of flexible sort of end of this is where it's really interesting, because you go from something that is just following a command to do something to something that actually is able to benefit us more by doing more things and adapting to what it sort of sees around it, I guess.
Yeah. Do you kind of get to like a bit of a paradox if you start having like automation for automation?
Yeah, I think, again, like if we try to stay away from this because it's sort of a massive minefield, isn't it? But the moment you sort of have like a robot able to not just build other stuff from command, but sort of recognize, oh, sort of my company needs more of these robots, I'll do that. Or, oh, I can slightly change this and make the robot that I'm building better. Then that's an odd situation, isn't it? Where you have like robots that are sort of designing themselves and building each other.
Especially when they like tell us that we're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
or they realize that we've put in limitations.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you start getting into like dark territories. But just quickly, while we're still talking about like transport and retail, I found this really cool like article, and they were just talking about like percentages that how this was going to affect the US mostly. I couldn't really find that much for the UK yet, but in regards to the US, they think that around 57% of all transportation jobs are going to be like autonomous in the US before the end of the decade, which I thought was pretty quick.
I would say that's about what I expected. I'd say half jobs to go in 10 years is sort of what I was thinking, because again, the transportation one is just the most obvious thing.
Yeah.
Break it down into trucking, well, that can be easily done. Most taxi servicing, like that can be done. The driving jobs that I think will survive are quite specialized ones. So like driving sort of bin wagons where you have to know sort of what you're doing and sort of you're only moving short distances of time, that sort of stuff. yeah, I think that's sort of what I would have expected. But it's still quite obviously it's going to be a massive problem, isn't it? Potentially.
Yeah, I just was thinking as well, even in regards to like our episode when we were talking about space tourism, like you have to think with these things like becoming autonomous, it kind of almost makes space tourism even doable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like a lot of the problems that we were discussing in that, it was kind of down to the experience, and if it's all autonomous, then you can kind of make the experience better because you haven't got to worry about half of the other stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
But
I think the thing with the space tourism is that that the things we talked about now is there's a clear job that's being done by humans, and you are creating something that replicates that. With the space tourism, you're sort of imagining what something will require and then trying to build something that does it without you can't ultimately know like every experience that will happen from just sort of like a thought experiment and then designing something that will do all of it. You fly something up there that's automated, things are going great, but then you get sort of like an odd experience that you weren't expecting, that a human would have dealt with, and you could have picked up on if you had that sort of period with humans on board.
yeah,
But you can't do anything about it because you've designed a robot that just can't deal with it. So
no, totally. I think as well, like at the moment, it's got to be a bit of a minefield, even for transportation, because like if you're building like autonomous vehicles, right? So say for instance, like Tesla, you've got so many, like, I don't know what you'd call them. Would you call them singularities? Maybe you would, every human that's driving. You've got so many like wild cards on the road in front of you because everybody's kind of conscious in their own like being, that it must just be a nightmare coding like the ethics into that. Like when you're weighing up in a situation, like if a car pulls in front of you, is it better to crash into that car or the car behind you, kind of thing, and things like that.
I think it's sort of really interesting, the sort of ethics behind.
Because it only gets easier, doesn't it, really, when everything is autonomous, because then the ethics are easy. Everybody shifts instead of just one person.
Yeah. There's sort of this like paradox going on here that you ultimately, if you're going to sit down and design an artificial intelligence or like an automated vehicle, it should be the safest, what's the word, like utilitarian, shouldn't it? It should have the best outcome for everybody. If everyone's driving them, it should just do what is in the best interest of everybody. But if there was just one car manufacturer that designed a car and said, okay, everyone else is doing this, but we're going to prioritize you. If you're in our car, we're going to make sure that you're the safest.
Yeah.
Then everyone's just going to buy that car, because although we might like to think, it should be for the greater good,
totally.
Nobody's going to get into a car that is voluntarily more likely to kill them.
No, that's true. That's true.
I think there is sort of almost like there's sort of like a political, like legal sort of side to this, isn't there? Of like who is deciding this and who is sort of implementing this stuff. And I think there is sort of almost a danger here that we let these companies get so big that they're untamable, and in 10 years' time, it's sort of a bit of the Wild West of automation, where you've got these companies that just try to outdo each other and make like one up each other in a way that isn't good.
You almost like, without sounding like that person, you almost kind of need like a one world, like automation system. Do you know what I mean? Just one across the board for the whole planet that we all use. But then there's a whole nother debate on who gets to be the person that designs the one world program. So I don't know, because I think in an ideal situation, humanity in like a couple of 100 years, you just want an AI world leader, really. you just want one AI that will just be the leader, and if we really still have to have like elections and all this kind of stuff, we can do them with different AIs if we have to. But you could just have one AI that here's what we all have to say, because we all have an app that we can like put our little bit of piece to. And then it just monitors the world and it decides how we can be productive and stuff. And it's kind of just like, come on, humans, this is how you do you. And I'll just make sure everything spins.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, there is this sort of like larger picture of, who should be deciding what we're doing. It's entirely possible that you build an automated vehicle and, for your own self-interest, you program it to do some like terrible stuff, but just because you want to sell them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question, and ultimately, I think we sort of need to be sort of moving towards a more cohesive answer for this. We can't. This is going to be such a massive thing with such sort of massive consequences. I don't think it's right to just sort of rely on the companies building this stuff to do the right thing all the time. But
yeah, no, I think I'd agree with you on that one, and as well, just like the future that we're going into with like cyber attacks and stuff too. Do you know what I mean? You don't want you don't want like a fleet of cars being hacked and then paraded through somewhere.
Yeah, I've always sort of wondered about that, like how because I can see how it's very possible if you just have a closed system. So you buy the car, and it's completely isolated from any sort of communications. Like that's sort of obvious, unless someone manages to physically attack your car and like alter it.
Yeah.
And if you get into that point, then why wouldn't they just like put like a car bomb on it or something?
Yeah.
But like with like the Teslas, like they receive updates and stuff, presumably over the internet or like something. What sort of security they have and how difficult it would be. I think there's been like a couple of movies about like someone like attacks the like air traffic control system, don't they? And like planes like fall out the sky and stuff.
Yeah.
But like, there is this sort of security side of things that is potentially quite worrying as well.
Yeah, it's interesting going forward though, because like with that ability too, it's quite funny, isn't it? Because like if you were trying to, there will be no more like car chases or anything like that. You won't be able to use the transport to escape. They'll just shut it off.
Yeah, police, instead of just like chasing you down in the car, they just flick a switch and your car will just
it just turns off,
slowly come to a stop, and
or
on the side of the road, the doors will lock and you're trapped in there.
the doors lock, and then it just slows down, and then it just takes you to the nearest police station.
Yeah, just right. Yeah, I guess that's one benefit.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. And as well, like when it comes to like natural disasters and stuff as well, I can imagine it'll be really like proficient when it comes to those kind of things. So say like if there's like an earthquake and there's an expected tsunami or something like that, you can just have these fleets like working in a way where like they're all just fluid with each other and you're just getting everybody out the area.
I think the sort of idea of fleets is, I wouldn't say sort of 10, 20 years time, but 50 years time, I can see the idea of fleets being much more sort of appealing and car ownership being much sort of less than it is now. Basically everyone now owns their own car. But reality is that you use it only for a small portion of the day. And I think you said something about like Tesla, like a rental system or...
Yeah. So Tesla want to have this, like they say that like you were saying, that you only use your car like driving to and from work, and then it just kind of sits on a driver in a car park most of the day. And it's this idea, I don't know if it's open to the world or if it's just like Tesla owners can have access to it. So if you own a Tesla, you have this in other cities, but it's this idea that like your Tesla in the day can act as like a taxi, and then you can make an income from that.
Yeah,
because I think the Tesla battery as well, it gives you like it's a lot higher mileage, isn't it? So you can do that. There's no like, it's not like a petrol car where you've only really got like 100 to maybe 200,000 miles on it before it's doomed.
Yeah, but I think that's obviously happening now, but longer term it will even go more, what's the word, sort of flexible than that, in that you won't even have your own Tesla. Either it will go completely sort of rideshare, so that everyone just uses sort of things like Uber, and you don't actually own a car. Because like, if you think about it, we could get to the point with automation where sort of ride hailing and sort of these sort of like Uber services just become so cheap that it's cheaper just to use that all the time and more efficient than it is to own a car and insure it and tax it and stuff. But we could also see, I've seen mooted like the idea of like community carpool. So the idea being that sort of like small groups like streets or villages or something have, instead of having like only one car each, they own a smaller number of like pooled cars.
Yeah.
So, you know, everyone sort of has different needs for their cars. So, for example, I drive like half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, go to work. You know, maybe an older person across the road maybe just goes shopping sort of in the mid-morning. Somebody maybe goes and picks their kids up in the afternoon. Someone maybe, you know, works shifts later at night, so they want to use it then. You know, instead of like the four of us owning a car each, we could just have one car that we share between us. And you can almost see it like, you could draw it as like a graph, couldn't you? That you have almost like energy, you have this sort of like peaks and troughs of like car usage. And as long as you can, between everyone, have enough cars to just reach the peaks, you know, and then use the sort of trough time to be sort of like cycling them over and charging them, you don't need to own that number of cars. You know, I don't know the figures, but, you know, I'd imagine basically car ownership in the UK, there must be 40, 50 million cars with, there's about 70 million people, isn't there? So there must be 40, 50 million cars.
No, totally.
How many of those are actually on the road at any one time? You know, maybe rush hour in the morning, there's maybe 25 million or whatever. You know, just speculate. So you've got basically 15 million cars that are completely sort of underutilized. As long as you have enough cars to meet that peak demand, then you just don't need the rest of them. So, you know, there's, you know, everyone's saving money in this, you know, because you're only owning half a car rather than the whole car.
Yeah.
You know, there's the environmental feel of sort of production and sort of running of the cars as well. You know, you could reduce the amount of, you know, instead of everyone having a sort of driveway at the front of the drive, you know, you could have gardens, and, you know, there's sort of so many sort of implications that this sort of automation allows for. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. And I think as well, like even kind of going back to what we were kind of talking about last week with the future cities, I could totally see something like this being implemented in like Africa when they start building it up with like electric cars and stuff. Yeah. And even looking at like the moon and Mars missions, that's probably what they'll do with the transportation that they have in those places. And I think that's probably going to become like a lot more accepted.
Yeah, definitely.
We just right now live in like an ideology where like it's nice to have your own thing, but I think in the future they'll probably laugh at the idea that we had to have our own thing.
Yeah, particularly with, we said, like developing nations and sort of when we move to sort of moon colonies and stuff. The obvious limitations of like resources and finance there will just sort of necessitate this. You know, it won't be a case. You know, we're in a fortunate position that, you know, I'm fortunate enough to be able to like afford to run my own car, but if that isn't available because of money or because there simply isn't the resources to do it, then, you know, this sort of carpooling, sharing ideas, just I think obvious, and automation allows that in a way that you couldn't otherwise. Because, you know, with sort of current cars, you could sort of do it, I guess, but you've either got to have like people like organising taxis together and sort of like cramming into taxis like that, or I've got to sort of like drive my car to work and then someone who lives around work can drive it sort of at like the shops and then they bring it back, I guess. Like it's a bit sort of weird, isn't it? Whereas with automation, you could just drop the car. You know, I know I went off on about the scooters. You know, you could imagine it like that. You know, the cars are just sort of left or sort of park themselves up in convenient places, and you go tap your phone on it and just go off in one. So like, yeah, I think there's sort of a lot of interesting sort of developments that come from this.
Can you imagine though if like your car got trashed by whoever was renting it that day?
Yeah, that's like the obvious thing, isn't it?
But maybe they just have a camera there so they can catch you can catch them and then you just get them done for it.
I think simplest thing is, you know, you have an app and it just knows your details. Like,
Oh yeah, and if you
so
trash it, you can like be charged more.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's obvious, but
yeah, I think that's
yeah,
a
I
I
think
think
so.
that's a good one, good way around
So
it. To be fair,
I know you mentioned about agriculture. You were looking at sort of what sort of things did you find in that field?
so they're saying in America they reckon 6 in 10 jobs are going to be automated,
Hmm.
but that doesn't surprise me.
No, I mean I've seen sort of like for a couple of years now they've been sort of like fitting these like self-driving systems to tractors because like the trucking, it's the simple thing of tractors goes up and down the field and like I mean even simpler than trucking, you haven't got any obstacles to worry about. You literally just follow GPS lines and
Yeah,
plow the field. This is basic stuff. I mean,
yeah.
so yeah, I can fully see agriculture being another one that goes big time.
Especially even again, like we were talking, like when we like the big picture now, when we like leave planet Earth, like it has to be.
Yeah, yeah,
It almost has to be like automated. It just makes sense.
yeah, yeah,
And especially with like all these like lab grown meats that we're doing now and stuff like that, like it just makes sense for it to all be automated. You can
yeah,
like yield the best crop that way, and there's just no mess.
yeah. I think the reason why we focused on transportation and retail is because they are probably going to be so obvious, aren't they? They're things that everyone encounters every day. But the sort of infrastructure and systems that are sort of behind our society, I think, will be again things that go really quite quickly. You know, you can imagine water systems and power plants and stuff being made automated. You know, food production and distribution and stuff being automated, and you know these sort of things will probably happen in the background. But there's just so much like efficiency savings that can be made. You know, even if it's as simple as you can only make people work right a certain number of hours a day, whereas with automation, you can produce food or produce electricity, water, whatever it is, like completely uninterrupted around the clock without even like having to think about, oh, can we have people working from 11 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning? I might have to pay them more, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
It's a bit of a tightrope for me, because it's like I have been one of those people before that kind of will just take the approach that like, a bit of a romantic when it comes to like technology, and the idea that like automation and technology will solve all of our problems. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. It'll be okay, kind of thing. And like everything's kind of going to go that way. But at the same time, sometimes I don't like those people too. So I have to play like devil's advocate a little bit, because like you could totally sit here listening to this and just be like, well, that's it. Automation's going to solve all of humanity's problems. And like, it totally could. It totally could. But it's just, there's so much that needs to be done.
I think, you can imagine like hundreds or 1,000 years in the future, automation is able to create like a utopia for us, because if you can imagine that everything that like you need in your life, everything that comes into your home, food, electricity, water, transportation, the lot is completely automated and it's just made on demand for humans by robots, then, the idea of people even having to work, or the idea of money being worth anything,
well,
is
this
completely useless.
this bit kind of excites me, because like the idea that like universe is like, say, in a couple of 100 years, because I don't think it's that far away, but I think we might not get it for sure. But this like idea that either you won't work, or it might be like a 2-day working week, and everybody kind of has universal basic income because the robots do the majority of like the economy and the workforce and everything. And then like we kind of just get to be humans, get to be like a little bit more like creative, or do research or art or create music. And it'll be a fun time to be around, or there'll be like a more extreme version of us millennials and have like more existential crises, because they'll all just be like I could do everything, but I don't know what I want to do. Do you know what I mean?
I think like this long term thing, like that's exactly it. And like you said about universal basic income, and I sort of want to come back to that, but I think it would even go further than that. You know, if everything is made, if everything is all like, why do I go to work? Because I need the basics of life, you know, food, shelter, water, etc. I could probably afford those on a part-time job. Okay, why do I do a full-time job? Because there's other stuff that I want to do. You know, I want to have, you know, TV and the
Yeah.
phone and all this sort of stuff. If everything of that is being made, then you don't need any income because nothing has value anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's like supply and demand. If the supply side is automated and anything that you want within reason can be made just for you, then you know, like you live in this utopia where like people don't need jobs because you know everything is just there, and you know, like you said, we can sort of do what we want. So, but I
like,
think,
but where does it stop too? Because like if we're talking like true utopia now, then you can even like apply it to the climate. Do you know what I mean? Like if we're talking quite far in the future now, I'm not saying that this is going to be anytime soon, but like even the idea of like nanobots that we just chuck up into the atmosphere. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
And we're like, monitor the levels. If it goes above this percentage, bring it back down. Convert these molecules into those molecules. Do you know what I mean? And things like that. And then, yeah, it kind of just becomes just this dream world of you can do whatever you want. You can have whatever you want. And there are consequences, but there isn't at the same time because we've got other things that are looking after those consequences.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think, you know, as I said, that is like long term. That is hundreds, if not 1,000 years in the future. The real sort of thing that I want to talk about, and I think it's interesting, but it's very, very worrying, is the short term sort of transition to that. There, okay, things like this have happened in the past, you know, like the move from agriculture to model agriculture and the move from sort of manufacturing and machinery to sort of digital sort of world, you know. There have been a number of like massive paradigm shifts in like human nature, you know. And just as an anecdote, one of my friends at high school, his like great granddad or whatever, he's called Edwin Budding. He invented the push along lawn mower.
Oh my God.
Like 200 years ago or something. He invented this, and at the time it like made massive news because essentially it put like thousands of scythesmen out of work. So like scythesmen were like people with like scythes who would like cut grass and stuff.
Yeah.
And like thousands of them out of work because they were basically specialized to do that one very simple job. And when the lawnmower came along, it completely made them redundant.
Yeah.
But at that time, you know, people were complaining, oh, it's a massive issue. But actually it sort of created, it basically allowed for mass participation in sport to happen, and it allowed for sort of people to have gardens and all this sort of stuff. Like it really changed everything, you know? And that's like just a sort of fun like small example, but you know there have been these like massive shifts in like what people do with automation. There is, I think, a massive thing, you know, you said about like 60% of people working in agriculture and 57% of was it retail, I think.
57 in transport.
There is I don't think it's even a risk, you know, this is a reality that in the next sort of 10-20 years there is going to be massive redundancies like across the board with very little place for them to go. You know, because you know ultimately this isn't shifting from people working in factories to people working in offices. You know, this is shifting from people working to people not working. This is, you know, and you know, I think it's very, very naive for sort of people. I think they're either kidding themselves or they're trying to soften the blow when they say, oh, but all these people will be able to train in cyber and train in like security and sort of tech and stuff. Ultimately, you know, if you have 100 people working in the supermarket and that supermarket goes automated, it is not going to employ 100 people running the automated systems. Like, it just isn't.
No, and the likelihood of most of those digital tech jobs being automated isn't far off either.
No.
Like I was chatting about this to some of my friends. This was ages ago because like we've got like friends that mechanics, friends that do like design like me, and then we've got friends that like work in like healthcare and stuff, and like all of those industries will be touched by automation without a doubt. Like mechanics and engineering and stuff, I can totally see that. Well, it already is. Most cars and stuff get built, and we're getting even to a day and age with like Teslas where sometimes you have like developers looking at issues with the car as to a mechanic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like with even like lawyers and marketing, you have this big rise in automation because it can take in all of that data so much better than a human can and figure out the ideal time to act, post, write, research. And then even like someone like me with design, you've got all these GPT-3 like programs coming out where you can literally ask it to like help you build UI, and it will. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like you're saying, it's going to be huge. And even like teachers, like even if you're a teacher, that's another job. Like there are so many careers that like when we were growing up, we're told like they were almost needed. Do you know what I mean? They're like solid jobs. But
yeah, the two that I just sort of put in there.
Yeah, sure.
The two for me is the creative stuff in particular. I think we are sort of sleepwalking into this idea that creative stuff is going to be untouchable by automation, and it just isn't.
Yeah, it's not.
The one for me is journalism. Journalism is obviously going through a pretty tough time anyway, but I think most people would say, oh yeah, journalists, that's like a safe job. Automation's not going to be writing stuff. It already is. A massive amount of online content isn't made by people. It's made by AI that is able to write as good as a person and just churn out online articles all day.
Yeah.
It's already happening. And the second one was, and this sort of gets my goat a bit, and I was prefacing it by saying I am not saying that people shouldn't learn languages. Like, I think it's important and good that people learn languages, but like just 10 years ago when I was like starting to learn Spanish, they were like, oh, you'll need to learn this. You can't just use Google Translate. It's not good enough. People will need to learn languages. Actually, I think for 95% of people, and languages students will hate me for this, but if you go to a different country as a tourist or as someone doing casual business and you just hold up your phone and get just talking to it, it is very, very good. Like, it is very, very good now. And like, this is like in 10 years, you've gone from Google Translate being awful to being able, there was that Google Duplex thing where they had the AI booking like a hair salon appointment, like a restaurant, and like it's able to understand language, I'd say as good as, a middle-aged child, not as good as like a linguist, but very, very good. And,
it's only going to get better.
And like, I think we are sleepwalking to this idea, I think people are starting to wake up to the idea that it will be, not to be rude, but like the unskilled jobs that go first, things that we spoke about earlier, they just seem obvious for automation to take over. But, these skilled, sort of highly professional, specialized jobs are just as likely to go eventually. You said about the lawyer, that I think will probably be one of the later ones, but you can imagine artificial intelligence being designed, okay, look at all cases in history and look at what this is and match up what do you think the verdict is,
Yeah.
Because that's basically what judges do. We have like a common law system where they look at like past cases and decide what is applicable to this case or not. That can be automated,
Yeah. Have you read the book Life 3.0?
Not, no.
Okay, I think it's by Max Telgar. Oh, I don't know if I've got that right. Somebody have a go at me if it's not. It's called Life 3.0. and it is a great book. It's all about artificial intelligence and automation, and he kind of starts the book with this idea of like a false reality. So we're living in pretend world now, and it's this idea that this company is allowed to create like this AI, but they've got this way of doing it because they don't want to be seen and they want to generate a lot of money. And he talks about like a hypothetical way that this company could do it. And they basically create this like basic AI, and then they start having it do like Amazon cloud work for them to like generate income. But then what they do, because he wanted to show how it could affect like the creative industry as well. It's not just like, as you were saying, like transport and agriculture and stuff. And it's fascinating. And like what they basically do is they get it to scan the internet and like watch just all of the content on like YouTube, all of the films, learn about all these different directors and stuff, and then they have it like basically storyboard and screenwrite and create these animations, and they create like a fake company that's kind of like Netflix that just starts putting out documentaries, films, and it's all CGI'd, but like the AI is doing it. And then after they do that, they build a part of the AI to do news. So it starts doing the news, but then it can report quicker than any of the news anchors can, because it can like artificially generate a news anchor and report the story instantly instead of having to pay somebody to come in and do it. And they slowly start doing this across all the industries. And then by the time people start noticing it, it's too late, because they kind of have their foot in the water with absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And it's really, really cool how they like talk about it. And even like that whole like idea of creativity is, yeah, totally, it's going to be autonomous. Have you seen the thing on YouTube with Robert Downey Jr. and AI?
No, I've not.
That's actually pretty good. It's a YouTube original, and it's just all about AI, and each episode they kind of just have like what AI is working on. And on one of the episodes they actually have Google like in to talk about like Google Translate. And I can't remember the name of the disease, but basically there's the guy in this has this disease and he can't talk anymore, and he's lost like a lot of ability. And they were able to use like a version of their Google Translate, but just feed it videos of him talking. And they made his own version of Google Translate, but it was with his voice. And when he tapped like his phone, they'd had it set up so based off what he tapped, the phone knew what to say. And like they got it to talk in his voice, and like his mum like started crying and everything, because like they hadn't heard him speak for like 7 years, and he was actually like talking and it sounded like him, and he started crying. And they were like showing like these kind of things, and it was just absolutely mind-blowing.
It's crazy, isn't it? And like, you know, I think a lot of people, I think the vast majority of people really underestimate where this stuff is at. Like, I think if you went onto the street now and said, "Oh, what do you think of automation?" You know, people would say, "Oh, yeah, 20 years we'll have self-driving cars, I think," and you know, this sort of stuff. If you ask someone, "Do you see newsreaders being replaced in the next 50 years?" They'd probably say no. You know, but the reality is, if you can get speech synthesization that is that good, and you can get the artificial intelligence to feed it, then why wouldn't you replace, you know, radio broadcasters with it? You know, it makes absolute sense. You know, I think, as I said, we are on the edge of a huge shift in the workforce. You know, it would genuinely would not surprise me if by 2050. 50% of jobs are replaced. And like,
yeah, no, totally. And not even them, like some of the luxury jobs too, because, and I might be wrong here, so internet, if I'm wrong, quote me on it, but I think there a few like influencers that are not like actual influencers now, but there have been some like autonomous like AI created influencers, haven't there, that like,
I don't know any of the details, but I do remember there being like a like a CGI like YouTube star. Like,
yeah, I think she's like a famous, yeah, Then she's all CGI'd, and she does like a video. And for a while, people weren't sure if she was real or not, was she? And in fact, this is a great like lead way into it. Even most call centers and websites, when you get a pop up being like, "How can I help?"
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not. I know it's not great, and you can tell sometimes what it is. But we are getting dangerously close to that line being blurred, where you don't know if it is a human or if it is a robot.
That Google duplex, I think it's about 5 years ago now, like genuinely like made me gasp when I watched it, because this is, for people that haven't seen it, if you just put in Google duplex cool restaurant or something like that, they get this AI that would, I don't think it's actually ever been deployed because I think it caused quite a stir basically, but it would be on your phone like your Google Assistant, and you say, hey, you know, book a table for 6 on this date at this place for me, and then Google will go away and do the call for you in the background. And they showed this clip of the call, and they call up, and they called this, I think it was a Chinese restaurant, and just the language and like what they were saying, it was quite difficult for even me to follow what was going on. They said, can I have a table for 6? And they replied with, oh, you want a table at 6 or something. It's just like miscommunication. Like even I would have to take a step back and think, hold on, can you repeat that? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And this Google duplex just did it. Like, and it was really creepy that in another one they booked like a hair salon appointment, and it like added like a little laugh like at the end of it, like, oh, that sounds good. Like, and it sounded like a person. Like if that was on the end of the phone, you would not know that it wasn't a person.
Yeah.
And once sort of thing gets, you said, call centers, radio broadcasts, anything that involves like quite easy communication, either one way or regimented answers. Like when you're calling your bank, there's going to be certain things that the person is going to be saying, isn't there? This sort of stuff. Even in the net, like even now, it could be done. And again, it's just a massive, massive amount of people's jobs just wiped out. It's obvious to do. It's economically advantageous, and it's quite simple to implement. This could happen overnight. A company like an internet service provider could say, oh, okay, our people are working from home because of COVID. We're losing money. Sorry, all call center staff are gone. It's going to be replaced with Google's AI. Like, it would be that easy. It really is quite worrying, I think. And what you said earlier about, I think you said like a 3-day working week and like universal basic income. The big thing for me is there's got to be a societal shift to that. There is no other way that can happen. As I said, we are looking at a significant amount of people being made unemployed with no obvious prospect of employment. This is, there's, typically like conservative people, it's not me trying to get political, but they will say, oh, you have to go out and find a job and train and, et cetera, et cetera. The reality of this is that there is not going to be enough jobs for people to do, whether it, either we are going to have to get used to the idea of, I don't know, 40% of people being unemployed and providing universal basic income for them and sustaining society in that way, or we are going to have to shift to, sharing things out and people work 3-day weeks or, the 25-hour work week or whatever.
Yeah.
There's no other option, I don't see, to this,
No, I'd agree with you. It's going to be a difficult time. I thought, not that I thought it was going to be anytime soon, but when like everything with COVID first started happening, I thought, oh, maybe this might be like a good shift in the right direction. We might start seeing a few of these things come into place. But the government tried just as quickly to get out of the lockdown as they tried to get into it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think, as I said, like hundreds of years from now, well, okay, I would hope things would be fantastic and we would live in this utopia. I suspect actually you'd end up with a few technology companies just monopolizing everything and us living in some hyper consumerist capitalist society. That's, you know, but yeah, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you know, it's going to be huge, and it's going to be awful. It's like...
another little one that I'd just like to sneak in there as well, which kind of upsets me, but well, it doesn't upset me, but it kind of takes away the magic of it for me, anyways. Astronomy is probably going to be another one that's hit.
Yeah.
You're going to just have some algorithm searching the stars instead of humans searching the stars, and I know they kind of go hand in hand at the moment with each other, but like I can totally see one day where there aren't actually any humans looking in that direction anymore, and it's just all robotic telescopes doing it for us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. You know, we've basically written off most of retail, transport, culture, and every other industry. So why not science? You know, absolutely. You know, you can imagine these things. Anything that involves big data.
It's already happening. You can have so many apps that you just load and you hold your phone in that part of the sky and it'll tell you what star it is.
Yeah, definitely. You know, you know, astronomy now, we've moved on beyond you point a telescope at the sky and look what's there. You know, you're taking hundreds or thousands of images of the same tiny bit of the sky trying to find something. You know, you build something like James Webb Space Telescope, which gives you such more precision and, you know, ability to see stuff. You just all day just point it at stuff, just collect absolutely anything you can, and just set artificial intelligence to just trawl through it, you know, in a way that people can't do. You know,
yeah,
it's really, it's you know, we started with the retail and transport, but it's going to be so much bigger than that in the future.
It's probably going to be the thing that like changes us the most.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Like drastically.
Well, this is the thing, you know, when you look back at what they called the Luddites. I think they were they textile workers, I think.
Yeah, I think
so. Basically, they were working the looms, and then the companies that sort of operated the textile mills said, "Oh, we've basically got rid of you because we've got these new machines that could do it twice as fast, and we don't need you to do it anymore." And the Luddites sort of, I think, like threw their shoes at the machines or something like this. You know, there's loads of stories like this of people in the past attacking machines. This could happen. You know, I can see, you know, hordes of like truckers destroying Tesla trucks because they've taken their jobs. This is, I put money on it. Like, I put money on by the end of this decade, you will see headlines of automated things, you know, distribution centers, trucks, robot teachers, whatever, being attacked and destroyed by hordes of angry, redundant people.
and do you know what's kind of unfortunate about that? It won't be necessarily the company's fault or the robot's fault or the product's fault that's been like automated. It will be whoever is in power of that time not handling the situation correctly.
Yeah,
and it'll cause a huge divide, and it'll be seen as a threat.
We've got to start preparing for this now. That we have got to expect a significant amount of people to be redundant, and creating a social system that allows for that. Because at the moment it doesn't. You know, if a massive amount of people were laid off tomorrow, which with COVID is entirely possible, but if that happened, our social systems will collapse. Like there's nothing that can be done.
Yeah,
we've got to start. And even just the sort of like the perception of it, you know, there's this sort of like perception of like being unemployed, and it is understandable. Being unemployed is bad, and you should have a job and stuff. That is not going to be an option in the future for a significant amount of people, and you know, things have really got to change, I think. Yeah,
and it's difficult as well, because then it can go the other way too, because then it's like, what's the point in studying or learning something if I'm not going to have a career in that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a horrible. That's like such a innovation killer. Do you know what I mean? Like the idea that there's no point me studying and going to do this because there's no job for me there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. People people were on about computer science and stuff, saying, "Oh, go do computer science and things because there's going to be loads of jobs coming up in the future." It's entirely possible, and you can do it already online. That you just basically very easily just say what you want to do, and artificial intelligence writes code for you.
Yeah.
If you're going to university and you're studying something that should be safe by conventional logic, you're studying software, so maybe something like app development, it's entirely feasible that in 10 years' time we'll have apps being generated by AI.
Yeah, totally.
So it's going to be huge, I think. And
I actually used to get into arguments of this at the pub, and it's always the one line where it's like, oh, well, one job that's always safe is like the developer, because the AI will always need developers to make sure that everything's running smoothly. And I always used to be like, are you joking? Are you joking? I'd be like, the AI will have an AI to make the AI okay.
yeah,
They won't need humans to stick around to make sure everything's running fine once it gets to that point.
But even short term, there will be people generating this like first wave of code and like first wave of AI. That's obvious. But even so, that it's not going to be the millions of people that are made unemployed. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
You can have, there's some companies, I don't have any on the top of my head, but there are some companies that are massive companies, huge companies. Mainly the tech companies like Apple and stuff, that only employ a small number of technical staff. Companies like Google, they run huge businesses. They sweep up massive amounts of the economy, but they don't employ the millions of people in the same way that supermarket chains do or that airlines do. It's going to be a real shock, I think, to most people over the next. I think the next 10 years is going to be massive in terms of the shift in human. What it is to be a human, what sort of we expect of people and what human life is. But somehow we've managed to start another episode on the what can the future be like and living in this utopia, and we've ended up with mass unemployment.
So like every week we just give the bleakest outlook on the future. But no, I think
future capitalism and
without making it, without like chucking like petrol on the fire anymore. But yeah, I think you've got a good point, and I think even like that idea of the future too. It's like you said, it's a problem, and I hope it's not counterproductive. I hope it doesn't send us the other way. And what I mean by that is like it makes it like tribalism becomes even more of a thing. Like it really is like, oh, us against that because we're all unemployed, and because nobody's working, maybe sports become more popular or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who knows?
It could go really, really well where people work 2 or 3 days a week, and we all have loads more time to do sport and
have families and socialize.
If things go well, this could be humans being freed from themselves. Basically, this could be it. This could be our salvation. But if things go badly, you could end up with an unemployed, not just unemployed. I think this is the key. An unemployable sort of class of people, a big class of people, and then just sort of like upper class of the people that control the tech and control the automation and food and these sorts of things. And the rift would be even great. There's a massive sort of rift between sort of working class and upper class now, but the rift would be even more so because I don't particularly subscribe to it, but it is possible today that a working class person can build their way up. in a world with automation to this sort of extent, there is no way that someone can break out of that because there simply isn't anywhere for them to go. So yeah, I think it's going to be a real issue, to be honest, and I think it's personally very worrying.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with you, man. I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years or a decade, if that. It's funny because this is another like kind of thing too. Do you think by the time you retire, like our generation, do you think we'll have to worry about that, or do you reckon retiring won't be a problem because all these things will be in place to finish this off for the episode?
You mean
so like with automation, with like how, like, you know how we were talking at the beginning of the episode where it'll get to a point where things will be a lot cheaper, or it might not even have a price at all, and there'll be 3-day work weeks, and a lot of the economy will be ran by automation. Do you see that happening by the time you retire? Because it's funny, because a couple of years ago, the government, there was this whole talk, wasn't there, that like, we won't get a pension scheme and we got to start paying into it now and all this kind of stuff. But do you think by the time you retire, there'd be any need for a pension scheme because we'll be living in this world? Or do you think our generation and maybe Gen Z and maybe the one below that will be the ones that get smacked in the face by this, but it'll be us really that go through that transition for future generations?
It's very late in the episode to bring this up because this is something that I really, really am interested in, this sort of like pension thing. It sounds a bit boring, but I think there's two things to this. Firstly, will this be something that affects us? I think absolutely. I think in 20 years' time, we will have a situation where there is mass unemployment and like automation has got to the extent that it is causing huge, huge problems. So firstly, I think, yes, it is going to affect us. The pension one, what is going to happen later in life? I fully expect people our age, people in their early 20s, will not get any meaningful state pension, because the problem is that people. The main thing is that people are having less kids, basically.
Yeah.
When national insurance was invented, there was about 4 working people for every pensioner, someone with pension age. You can sort of see how 4 full-time working adults could support a pensioner. That number has just gone below 2 working adults to pensioner. And I think by the time we're meant to be retiring, it could go nearer to 1.
Lovely.
It is not feasible for a working person to, basically financially support a pensioner each. That can't happen. It's not going to happen. It's a real massive issue. It's starting to happen in places like Japan first, because they sort of went through this. It's basically technology boom. Technology and modern life is not conducive to having kids, basically. And they're sort of happening. They expect in the next sort of 20, 30 years, they will get to this point where there simply is not enough working people to support elderly people. For us, it's going to be, as we sort of retire, that the pension system is going to fall apart. And that's where automation, out of everything, and I know I've been quite maybe negative about it, but this is maybe a situation where
there's your safety net.
It is good because you could use the automation to care for the elderly. It sounds a bit horrible putting old people in homes and having robots run after them, but this could potentially work.
Yeah.
We don't have enough working people. The working age population is going to start shrinking. Okay, they can take the remaining jobs that are there. It's not going to solve everything, but that could happen. And we use the automation to run retirement villages and deliver food to these people and stuff. Do doctors' checkups at home, this sort of stuff. So I think it's really interesting, and I wouldn't mind coming back to it another episode.
God, can I just say, we're painting a right picture for the future just thinking about it, because we've sat here and we've gone, the climate, it's going downhill. It doesn't look like it's going to be good in 50 years. And then our next thread's go, and by the way, society will probably collapse. be like any one of these things that in itself, yeah, it could be the great filter, but here's two that are definitely going to happen in our lifetime. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, I definitely think so. The climate change one is obviously a massive global thing.
That mixed in with automation, it just doesn't sound fun. But although, like I was saying earlier, automation could solve both.
Mm-hmm. I guess we'll just wait and see. Maybe next week we'll try and find a topic that's a bit more optimistic.
Yeah.
We'll probably do. Start with like halcyon days, and everything will be absolutely fantastic with this new technology, and we'll end up with the end of civilization as we know it. Sure.
Well, we are slowly creeping towards Halloween as well, so I guess we're allowed to be a little bit more like cynical and scary in October. And it is also 2020, so
yeah, the end of life as we know it is about as scary as you can get, I think. So, have you got anything else to wrap up with?
I don't for automation, but I have some cool news stuff. If you want to move over into the news.
Do you mind if I start with that? Because I've got a piece that goes back to this.
Go for it.
So I think I mentioned earlier about sort of automated taxis and stuff. So this company called Cruise, it's quite an interesting one. Essentially, this company called Cruise they've designed a completely automated pod car. So it's not like Tesla where you have like the steering wheel and pedals and stuff, and it is able to drive by itself, but as a person. This is like when you think of like self-driving car of the future, a pod with like 4 seats like facing inwards, absolutely no controls, it just does its thing. So this company called Cruise, they've got prototypes, they've got a vehicle that is apparently being used by them internally, so like employees can ride around.
Cool.
Presumably their site or whatever using these vehicles, and they're trying to sort of pitch it as like I said, like the new Uber, that you can just call it and it will arrive and pick you up. And there's this sort of like ride sharing thing where if someone is sort of calling it on the route that you're on, it will just sort of pick that up as well. But it's quite interesting. It looks really cool. But I said earlier about like COVID being a catalyst for this sort of stuff. There's an article in The Verge today about how they're sort of trying to use this stuff to combat COVID. So they've adapted their current vehicle. It's called the Origin. It's like their self-driving car, and they put like a big like perspex divider down the middle of it. So presumably 2 people can use it together, even though they're not from the same family or something. Yeah. But with there being no driver, obviously that's one less sort of contact point. And they've actually started to put in sort of petitions and lobbying with the US government to basically try and get this thing on the road. I didn't realize that the US government is only allowed to give 2,500 exemptions a year for cars that don't have like steering wheels and pedals. I don't know how they arrived at that number, but they've decided that it's perfectly fine to have 2,500 vehicles a year with no controls. And basically, Cruise are trying to get that up to 25,000 and are lobbying to sort of get some of these exemption permits so they can start putting, presumably, these vehicles onto the streets of cities and starting a sort of self-driving ride-sharing service. So it's all kicking off, and again, with like the COVID stuff, it seems to be speeding along at an ever-increasing pace.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I've got all my stuff this week is space related.
Lots happening this week.
Yeah, lots of stuff happening. So the first thing, I don't know if I'm saying this right. Orionid meteor shower.
I think that's correct. That's how I'd say it.
Cool.
Just roll with it. Be confident.
Cool. So it's the Orionid meteor shower this week in. I know you can see it tonight in the UK and for the next couple of days. I don't know if that's the same for America, but it's usually a couple of days off from each other, isn't it? As they move around. But you've got that, which is pretty cool. And then the thing that happened last night today, so we're recording Wednesday this week, if you're a bit confused by the news, we had the Osiris asteroid sample from NASA. And I don't know if they've released the footage for it yet, but it looked really cool with all the animations, how it like bumped it and scooped up some of its material, and it's then left it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, so this was OSIRIS-REx, wasn't it? So basically, this satellite, I think it launched in 2018.
Yeah.
So they launched it into orbit around this asteroid called Bennu. It's about 200 million miles from Earth at the moment, and it's been sat there for some months, I think, just sort of orbiting the asteroid, sort of doing science, taking pictures, that sort of stuff. And then last night, it descended, and basically they've called it like a touch and go. So it descends, picks stuff up, and then returns to its orbit. And I think it's meant to return to Earth 2023 and bring back some of these samples. So this is really cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. Just like the idea that like we sent something off the planet 200 miles away, 200 million miles, not 200 miles, that's nothing, 200 million miles away to like this asteroid, for it to go down, bump it, take something from it and bring it back to Earth. It's just crazy.
It really is. And there's a lot of things that could come out of this. So I think I mentioned on an earlier episode about this idea that potentially life came to Earth on an asteroid. So they're looking at sort of biosignatures.
Yeah.
Water coming to Earth on asteroids is another possibility. Presumably they're going to be looking at sort of like the structure of the asteroid for metals and stuff. There's this sort of crazy idea that we can mine these asteroids for rare metals and things.
Yeah.
And this mission is really quite important because there's only so much that you can do remotely on another planet or another sort of body. Bringing these samples back to Earth will allow us to do all the science that we can think of on them. So it's really interesting. And yeah, I think it's one of the coolest missions for quite a long time, actually.
I was going to say, actually, I've read something, but I'm not sure if it's real. I was going to ask you about it. They're saying if you were to mine the Oort clouds of the solar system, you could turn every human on planet Earth into a billionaire.
I can imagine that, absolutely.
Obviously, that would just wreck how... It would just wreck conversion rates and everything. If everybody was a billionaire, bread would be very expensive. But that's cool. I didn't know that.
It's the rare earth metals, I think. So, a lot of these asteroids have things like iron in them and stuff that are, I mean, there maybe is some value in them, but it's not worth going to them. But things like neodymium, which we use for magnets, particularly become more technical. We're going to need more magnets for magnets appear in basically any electronics you could think of. Stuff like that. If you can find an asteroid, like a candidate for asteroid that has a huge amount of this stuff, then it becomes sort of economic to do it. And I can imagine the Oort cloud containing. I when you said billions, I can imagine it being trillions or quadrillions.
Yeah. To be fair,
the amount of material.
Yeah, because it's just broken up planets, really, isn't it, into just asteroids and stuff. So yeah, I can. It's funny, really, isn't it? How we value everything on Earth. Because if you actually like sit back and look at it, it's just that's how much material that we have of that said thing. And if we find a big enough asteroid or a planet made of that one day, and we manage to like take those resources, it could almost make things like you can imagine like something really surreal in the future where water ends up becoming the most expensive thing. Do you know what I mean? Or like iron, because we used it all and there's none left.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is again like supply and demand. As we use stuff up, it's possible that I know helium's a big issue. Is it cost effective to go and get it at the moment? No, but in 100 years' time, would it be cost effective to go to a gas giant or to one of their moons or something and suck up a load of liquid helium and transport that back to Earth? Potentially, I think it's just going to be interesting where it goes. And with this sort of stuff, it'll be interesting to see if any like commercial companies get involved, because that will be like a whole new domain of like space mining. the issues that come with that.
It's a little bit off topic, but I watched a video a couple of days ago where it was just like a time lapse of the universe, and it kind of just ran out. I don't know if you've seen one, but like it got to the point where like all the stars were blowing up and everything had expanded so far from each other that nothing was ever going to see each other like again, and all this kind of stuff. And I was just watching it, and I was like, what a terrifying thought. Like, just one day there's not going to be anything left, or it will have expanded so far from everything else that all you'll have is your little bit.
Yeah.
Like,
so this is called heat death. Where basically stars sort of like galaxies regenerate themselves. You know, a star explodes and creates like a new area of matter that is able to, you know, develop into new stuff. But if everything sort of spreads out so much through the expansion of the universe, then that sort of stops happening.
Yeah.
But don't worry, listeners, that's not going to happen for billions of years. Yeah. This is not a 20-year timescale.
Yeah. You haven't got to worry about it. But no, it's actually Melody Sheep. If you want to go and watch his videos on YouTube, it was awesome. It blew my mind. You got to see right to the very end where there was basically nothing left. It was pretty cool. It was all that was left were black holes, and they were just like resonating until they all became one, and then they radiated away, and it was just crazy. It was pretty interesting. Had my attention for a while. But other bit of space news that I've got is SpaceX. They've been doing some more Starship tests, and they did their triple engine fire for the first time. I think this was last night at their Boca Chica facility in Texas. And this is good because it's basically another step towards getting this. Starship. I always call it Starhopper, but that's what it was called at the beginning, wasn't it? Starship.
Yeah.
And it looks awesome. I would love to go and see this thing when they actually build one. It's going to be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're effectively doing, it's just another engine test for the SN8. So it went well, I think, according to Twitter. So I'm excited to see what they do next. I saw that he put the fins and the panels on the side of it, and I think he's planning on doing a hop with that soon. So it'll be cool to see like an actual shape of the rocket.
Yeah. So I think I saw a really interesting thing that basically the three engines they've tested. So you can imagine they're like arranged in a triangle, and they're able to like pivot in like three axes to like provide the control for this stage.
Yeah.
And then around that, there's going to be three more slightly bigger engines. I think they're the Raptor engines.
Yeah.
They're going to provide sort of most of the lift. So these are sort of like the more complex engines, I guess in some ways, and they're going to fit these sort of other three engines around them to make this stage. And then doesn't the like super heavy booster have like 28 engines or something stupid?
It has another 28 on the base.
Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting step, and I think it's gearing up. Is it? No, that's NASA. Never mind. I'm just thinking about where we're going. I think 2024 NASA wants to get on the moon, don't they?
I think 2024 NASA wants to get on the moon, and I think SpaceX are also planning that like trip to the moon and back with that billionaire person that's paid to go on it.
I was thinking last night, if the schedule holds in 2024, NASA launch to the moon, I will be very, very tempted to go to America and watch the launch.
Yes, 100%. That is like on my bucket list of things to do.
I think, that's like the ultimate goal, isn't it? You know, we want to see people on the moon.
I want to go to the rocket launch when we send humans to Mars. The first group that go to Mars, I want to go and watch that leave planet Earth.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that'd be insane.
Yeah.
Hopefully we sort out the world by then. There's not a pandemic going on or anything, and we're able to just freely.
Yeah, we still have jobs and.
Everything's fine. We haven't gone unemployed just yet.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be pretty awesome, and they seem to be churning out these like SpaceX like updates like, every week. They seem to like, oh, this booster is tested and they've done this, so it's developing at a pretty quick rate from my point of view.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was watching a documentary with like some SpaceX employee, and he he was talking about it, and they were saying how like with the like US government, when it was like NASA, they would hire people to build specific parts, and because it was all like classified, they'd only tell you about the part that you were building. So like there wasn't real like innovation or leaps forward, because it was kind of like progress was always halted because you just build your little bit and then add it on. But they were saying like with Elon, it was always just, what do we need to get that bit to work? And then instead of it being like, well, we can't tell you what the process is so you can figure it out, it was like, no, we'll hire everybody that we need to figure this out. And he was saying how like there was like this point at one point where they'd ran out of screws, and there was no manufacturer of these screws that could have that you could have on the rocket to go to space. And Elon like brought a company in and purchased the company and absorbed it into SpaceX so he could have their stockpile of screws so they could like resume work the following day. And it's just like, to be fair, that is what you want, really. As I know, I always sit here and I'm like, oh, private companies doing all this kind of stuff, but private companies are going to be the people that probably speed up that timeline and getting us into space.
I think so. They're just much more agile than governments can be. Governments, they have budget constraints and they have political motives, whereas companies, they can just do what they like, and as long as they don't even have to turn profit, really. They just have to do things that get the stakeholders interested. So yeah, I think it's looking really promising for the future, like the next 10-20 years of space travel.
It's going to be cool. But that's my space news. Have you got anything else?
Yeah, I had two more pieces. So the first one was space/tech. So sticking with sort of SpaceX stuff, SpaceX have announced a partnership with Microsoft for basically cloud-powered space computing.
Okay.
So Microsoft are obviously like a big player in the sort of data center, cloud computing sort of stuff. So they have this product called Azure, which, as I understand it, is, and I'm not an expert on this, is sort of similar to like Amazon Web Services. So it's sort of cloud-based sort of service that they offer. And they've basically launched this subdivision called Azure Space. So teaming up with SpaceX, as I understand it, there's going to be sort of components going on to future satellites, so actually things in space. But then they've got this like whole framework of sort of things that they're building on the ground to support that. So like data centers that connect into things. So
interesting.
The sort of looking at the Microsoft blog on this, they sort of talk how SpaceX obviously have Starlink, so lots of sort of satellites in space providing internet sort of capability. And that's going to be sort of like the link that Microsoft use and sort of integrate into this Azure space system.
Cool.
And they call it Azure Modular Data Center. And on the ground, they're going to have these sort of data centers that support this. And this really interesting picture of, they call it a self-contained data center. So it looks like a sort of container, like a shipping container thing. So it could be like moved on a truck.
Yeah.
And it's got like fans and vents at one end, and then like inside of it is like a data center. So I think the idea is that what they want to do is, we spoke on the podcast before about how SpaceX and Starlink are trying to, with their Starlink thing, are trying to like provide internet to communities. I think Microsoft is sort of trying to build on that, and in these rural or developing communities, the idea is that you would take this sort of shipping container data center and drop it off, and then you could do like big data-y stuff or sort of stuff like a community scale without having to plug in any of the infrastructure to it. Obviously it needs to be powered.
That's cool.
But you would link it up to Starlink and you would have like a data center ready to go. So as I said, like in developing communities, or there's the possibility that this thing could be dropped into, like, call it like challenging missions, so things like natural disasters and stuff, where the existing sort of data centers have been wiped out. You just drop this thing off and link it up via satellite using Starlink. So they're sort of building this sort of space-based data center system.
That's cool.
With SpaceX. So I thought it was quite interesting, and obviously loads of potential implications for this.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then the final bit of news that I had, if I can just pull up, is science-based, and it's a live science article, and it's based on a research paper that came out recently. And basically, scientists have managed to measure the shortest time ever observed.
I did see this.
It's called it's crazy. It's called the zeptosecond. So this is a trillionth of a billionth of a second.
All right.
So it's a decimal point with 20 zeros. So this is ridiculously small. When you, like a nanosecond is 9 zeros. So this is crazy, and they've managed to, for the first time ever, measure the time it takes for light to travel the width of a hydrogen molecule.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, I thought it was a hydrogen molecule. That's just bonkers.
Yeah, so basically, it's very technical, this stuff, but they've basically managed to shoot X-rays at in a particle accelerator at a hydrogen molecule, and it's tuned so that you get an excitation and it releases a photon. And they've then managed to measure that photon at the next atom over. So basically going from one atom to another, is, as I understand it, what they've done. So they've measured this, the time it takes for this photon to go from one atom to another, and it's 247 zeptoseconds. But this is crazy. You know, firstly, from a technical perspective, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there is this sort of, the potential for this is really, really massive. There's, as we move into more like digital age, like high precision timing is going to be a really, really important part of that. And, you know, although this is very, very sort of research based at the moment, there's no sort of practical applications yet for it. There is a potential that it could become quite interesting over the coming years, either in research or sort of in innovative things.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that pretty much does it for this week's episode. A bit of a longer one than usual, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed it. If you want to suggest a topic or you want to get in touch with us, you can drop us an email at theinfinitevoidpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to follow us on or keep up to date on our socials, it's at Infinite Void Pod, and that is on Twitter and Instagram. That was smooth this week. And then my Twitter handle and Instagram handle is at Jacob E. Carson, and Matty, yours is?
I am at the Matty JMP.
And yeah, guys, thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the Infinite Void next week.